Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Portions of the following program were pre-recorded.
The following paid program does not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its staff, or iHeartMedia.
Aloha, and welcome to the Freedom Hour, presented by the Aloha Freedom Coalition. This weekly program serves to educate, empower, and encourage you, the citizens of Hawaii and the United States of America, on issues impactful to your constitutional freedoms. Call now, 808-521-8383 to share your voice this morning. Here are your hosts of the Freedom Hour, Gary Cordery and Doug Pasnick, along with John Matthews on News Radio 830 KHVH.
Well, thank you very much on a cool and clear-ish Saturday morning. It is the Freedom Hour on News Radio 830 KHVH, and so glad that you're here. And the guys are back, and you are back. 808-521-8383 to lend your voice to this Freedom Hour once again for January 17th. Good morning, Gary Cordery.
Good morning, John. How are you doing today?
Let's try that with a microphone on.
All right, let's turn it up. Good morning, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Awesome.
And Doug is here as well. Doug Pasnick, good morning.
Hey, good morning. Good morning, John. I couldn't believe how cold it was out there this morning.
It was freezing.
Can you believe I said that?
I'm still wearing I dragged this out for special occasions like the last couple of mornings.
That's right. I went to an event last night in Barbers Point.
Mm-hmm.
I had to put on 2 shirts.
Yeah.
That's unprecedented for me. I'm hot-blooded. I mean, I don't need 2 shirts, but last night I'm putting on 2 shirts.
Yeah, it's just been, it's good sleeping weather, but when you got to get up early and be in it, it's a little bit dicey. So the Freedom Hour is underway once again. You make the Freedom Hour go. What's a good way for people to get in touch with Aloha Freedom Coalition and to keep the Freedom Hour talking about the issues that you are discussing in your daily lives?
Wow, John, thank you for that. The Freedom Hour has now been on for 70 weeks. That's fantastic. That's well over a year and a quarter now. And it is supported by the listener out there. This is your show, the people of Hawaii. And actually mainland listeners as well. And the way to support the show, to underwrite the show, to make sure the show continues, is to go to AlohaFreedomCoalition.org. You can go there, you can comment, and you can make a donation. We would love to hear from you. We would love to have your support. I can tell you this show depends on you.
Absolutely. And the show also is podcast every week. We get it up on the website as soon as we get off the air, and you can visit khvhradio.com and find the entire litany of Aloha Freedom Coalition Freedom Hours up there and all perfectly described. So if there's an issue that you think nobody is talking about, I'll bet you that we have a show for you. And we keep updating them as we go along because new things happen, new policies happen, new leadership happens, and these issues have to we have to keep updating them because there's changes that happen.
You know, we get emails as well, and I just got one the other day from someone in the mainland who was actually asking about HB 1118 and what we talked about last week. So the word, on the street, what we're talking about here is relevant not only to the people in Hawaii, but the people in mainland as well that have concerns about the policy changes that are occurring on the island. So we get occasional emails from people, and I thought it's very refreshing when we do because people are paying attention to these issues, and it's why we're here. We're here to help Hawaii recognize what's important to Hawaii, or at least what they should have on their radar, and to be tracking those things, especially as we go into this next legislative session.
And just to put a bow on the podcast, once again, khvhradio.com, just look at the drop-down menu. You'll find the Freedom Hour there. Sometimes we talk about stuff like specific bills, like specific legislation that's moving through. And to be frank, it might be a little bit thick for people to grasp all in one live setting. The great thing is you can go back and replay this episode on the podcast until it finally sinks in or you finally understand everything that goes on with your government. It is your government, and that is one of the things that we are talking about today. They often say people don't want to know how the sausage is made. Today's show is all about the sausage, I think, as I look over the overview as to how things happen in your state government when it comes to your money. And Gary, why don't you introduce what we are going to be discussing today?
Well, thank you for that. You know, when you watch sausage being made, it's pretty gross. Have you ever seen that? I'll never eat sausage again. Until it's cooked up and put on your plate, and you go, wow, that's fantastic.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
I wish, though, that the discussion that we're having today about making the sausage in financial budgeting from the state's perspective, the governor's package, it's gross. It's a gross process. And when it's all baked up and done, it actually doesn't taste that good.
No.
That's a non-technical description of what we're having today.
Yeah. Well, it really puts things into context when you start to look at how much money it takes to operate a state. And you could look at other states, but we want to talk about what's relevant here. The fact that our budget in the state, just the operating budget, is about $20 billion per year. 20 billion is such a big number.
20 and a half.
We throw that number out like it's not a big deal, but how that translates down to the individual and where taxes get paid and how revenues are generated, it is important for the people to understand. Because when we talk about things like cost of living and how it's harder and harder to make ends meet, it all comes back to what's it take to run the state. And are you getting the services from the state that can justify that type of expense? That's just an operating budget.
A lot of this is also in the shadow. This topic today is in the shadow of what is happening or what was discovered in Minnesota, and you get the very strong gut feeling it is happening in every state. Money that is paid by taxpayers, the people pulling the wagon, that is being just thrown, burned, into the wind, however you want to use that metaphor, it is not being used for the purposes for which the legislature or the earmark says it's being used.
Yeah, that's a great comment, John. I think today's conversation is really about stewardship. It's a recognition that the government has been entrusted with the taxpayers' resources to ensure that those resources are actually allocated in such a way that the people have the services that are supposed to be guaranteed to them. And a lot of things that we're finding out when you mentioned, the unknown budgeting process, the processes that happen behind closed doors, these are the ones that we just want to have accountability and transparency on. And this budget is laden with resources, not just for fiscal year 26, but moving forward all the way through 31, that will have hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of unaccountable spending and declarations for spending for projects that aren't defined. And the people are left wondering, well, where's my taxpayer going? Because my potholes, my restroom, my traffic lights, the weeds, the simple things aren't actually managed by the government. So it's a difficult conversation to unwind, but vital.
Just before we get into the weeds on this, before you think that this is a show that, it's going to be completely in the weeds, keep one thing in mind, one umbrella concept in mind as we talk over this next hour. It's your money. It's your money. You will be filing taxes before you know it. The tax deadline for the state of Hawaii is the 20th of April. For the federal government, it's 15th, obviously, of April. That's when we mark every year. And the taxes that you paid that were pulled out of your paycheck, no matter how small, no matter how large, it's your money. And how is it being spent and sent without your consent through your representatives? You elect your representatives to spend this money for you. How is it being spent? Just keep this in mind, because it is a substantial amount of your money when you look at it as a percentage.
Highest in the nation.
That is funding all of this. Yep. So let's just start with what people think tax and spending is or should be, like from our civics classes, and then maybe the reality of how things are actually earmarked, budgeted, sent. There's a difference in what people think and how people, how it actually works in the big square building.
Well, I don't know that we can cover that in the hour or the few minutes that we have left remaining. But
No, we couldn't cover it in an hour.
We should start praying right now.
Yeah, we should start praying.
But there is a difference.
So probably the first thing, again, just to get back to the baseline and not to get into the minutia about the numbers because it can get very confusing, but is that there's two pieces of the budget. Basically, there's an operating budget and there's a budget associated with improvements to infrastructure in the state. And in the out years, the next year and beyond, basically the operating budget for the state is about $20 billion. We've mentioned that number before. It's good to have that in your heads, that you're familiar with the numbers. And again, it's a big number, and it breaks down into several different categories. You have education, which takes up about a third of that budget, and that includes K through 12, all schools, and then also the University of Hawaii. And a third of that budget is about a $6 to $7 billion chunk out of the pie, if you will. Then you've got another quarter to a third that goes to health and human services. So including Medicaid, about $5 to $6 billion. So all those programs that fall under that category add up to about a third as well. And then interestingly, the remainder, aside from a small sliver for the police and corrections, which is about a tenth of that budget, goes to the payroll and the benefits that are paid to the to the people that are working for the government in the state. And so that's about half of that fund. So about $10 billion is what's funding the payroll of people who are working for the state. So about half is covering education, health and human services, and public safety, and the other half is generally being spent on their salaries.
It's an incredible number, and we've been talking for a while about the size of state government and the size and its implication on the ability for people to afford to live here. If you have an ever-growing government, in which we do, if you look in the governor's package, which we'll discuss in a few moments, we're about to enter the legislative session, which is this is why we have this show today. In the 22nd, I believe it's the 22nd, right? The 22nd, we're going to, the 23rd.
Next week, Saturday.
Next week. So, the 23rd. The new legislative package will be presented by the governor. Within that package is the funding proposals for the things that Doug just mentioned, the breakdown of these proposals and where the resources are supposed to go. The decisions made by the legislators about whether they approve this budget or not will directly impact the cost of living in Hawaii. As Doug mentioned, one of the things that takes up the vast majority of the budget is the expense of public employees working for the state. So you have an ever-increasing state government, but you have a shrinking population. I want you to think about this for a moment. You have an ever-increasing tax requirement because you have an ever-increasing government, the size of government, but a shrinking tax base. The math means that fewer people will pay more in taxes, not less. This is the stark reality, and that's why people are very uncomfortable in the state about the trajectory of our financials.
Before we talk about the current package, what happens at the legislature to get this through that body to the governor's signature eventually? Because what the governor proposes, he's still the executive. It is just a proposal. It has to go through the legislature itself. So what does that process entail as we approach the start of the legislative session on Wednesday?
Let me get to that, but I want to mention one other thing, and that is the $20 billion doesn't include capital improvements. So all of the improvements to buildings, infrastructure, long-term projects that are going on in Hawaii are another $4 billion. So when you look at the whole collective, the $20 billion is the number we kind of keep referring to, but it's really about $24 billion. And there's some other things that aren't in this projection. But interestingly, about a fifth of that, or 20% of that $24 billion, comes from the federal government. So as we move into the legislature, think about this, that as we see changes in federal spending and allocations to states, those subsequently then impact the state. And the question becomes, how does the state deal with that? So when there's changes at the national level that the state depended on for some program, and there's a change, then how does the legislature react? Do they penalize the people for that shortfall, or how do they make up for it? So it's a kind of a big question that will leave us as we move into the next legislative session.
It's a bigger question in that the state, for years and years and years, it was very much acknowledged, as Dan Inouye was our senator all the way up until he died in 2012, I believe. One of his primary things was he was very, very powerful in the financing area from the federal government level, and shunted a lot of money towards the state of Hawaii. After he died, you obviously had a very tied to Hawaii president at that point, Barack Obama, who probably encouraged that money keep coming here. The Trump years didn't really change that much. And then you had COVID, with a big influx of COVID money initially under the Trump administration, and then another friendly administration to the government here that is Democrat dominated. So Hawaii really hasn't faced, in real terms, a cutback on the federal level. Might be interesting to think about what would happen if that was truly implemented, because that's a lot of tax money, guys.
Well, we just saw that actually happen in real time. There was the government shutdown a few months ago. Mm-hmm. It wasn't long before the governor started stating, in the public square, the federal government has cut our change. We're we're in a crisis here, right? We need to actually, sue the government. They allocated funds to the attorney general to sue the Trump administration on basically every policy had to somehow insulate the state of Hawaii from the federal government and its cuts. But what people don't realize is all along, the state had already had the money already allocated to them and in the piggy bank to make up the difference for these cuts. But they don't say that. And so this is the part of the problem. And honestly, the federal government is going to continue to cut resources to states. They are. They're tired of things like Minneapolis. The federal government has been funding these kinds of resources for states for decades now. And Dan Inouye is no longer here. And you may notice that Brian Shaw says the same thing. Well, I got this much money for the state of Hawaii from the feds. I think that's going to dry up. And it's one of the reasons why we need representatives from the state. Brenton Awa is an example, as running for Congress. He needs to be elected so that the state of Hawaii actually has somebody from Hawaii that will speak for Hawaii's priorities rather than the priorities of a different agenda.
And recognize that the gravy train may be coming to its final station.
Yeah.
Well, it might also beg the question is, if you're building a plan that's based on a handout from another entity, then what is the risk to your plan? So from a planner's perspective, that's a lot of risk if those changes are possible. And so if you don't have some shock absorber built into your plan, which in some cases is really the general fund, which is what we end up talking about here today, and potential proposed, well, I shouldn't say proposed, the idea that there might be changes to Act 46 and tax reform that's supposed to occur in the future, then that's a bad plan if you have to go there. So I want to go back to your original question, though, and that was what happens in the legislature. So every odd year, there's a biennium budget that's passed that covers a 2-year period, but every year there's a supplemental that's passed. And that supplemental provides guidance on largely the out years, but small adjustments for the in-year execution. So we won't see a biennium budget this year, but what we will see is a supplemental package that the governor will put forward, and it'll go through the same process that a bill does. So if you remember back from our shows last year, bills go up through the House and or up through the Senate, and they'll start in the House Finance Committee in hearings, and they'll start in the Senate in the Ways and Means Committee, And there will be hearings, and there will be the opportunity for people to testify and to ask questions, which is really why we're here today, is to talk about those questions. And then that that bill or that package, that appropriations bill, will move its way through the House, through floor readings, and then subsequently to votes, cross over, and then travel down. And if it makes it all the way through that process, with some adjustments, then it'll go to the governor for a signature or for implementation. So that's how it's going to get signed into law. So we can watch it all unfold in the legislative session that's coming up.
521-8383 if you want to chime your voice or ask your questions on this particular topic and others surrounding our state budget. Just a dumb question here, since we were talking about federal funding that may be going away and other sorts of things. With a 2-year budget, I got to assume you're assuming that you're going to get certain streams of money. What happens if you don't get that stream of money coming in from particular sources that you were expecting? Maybe not even the federal government, but maybe taxes that don't get approved. We've got this big fight over that green fee in cruise ships right now. Whether that or that does not happen, I know is a big sticking point right now in the state budget. And that's just another circumstance. So what happens if the appeals court does strike that green fee down, or any other sort of funding sort of dries up?
Well, that's a real consideration, John. And actually, those decisions are made based on assumptions. The governor and his executive team have determined that the economy over the next few years is going to get better, a little better, 1-2% better. It also believes that the Japanese tourists are coming back. And so based on these projections, they actually develop a projected resources that will be available for spending, and that's how they do it. And does it transpire? Maybe there's a downturn, and you're hearing in part the governor he's basically saying, well, we might not actually give those tax breaks that were in law. Act 46 is in law, right? That tax break is in law. Now the governor's saying, well, things are not quite as rosy as we thought. We may have to delay the implementation of the tax breaks. And the people are like, what? Will
he delay that through a vote in the legislature, or is it going to be one of those emergency proclamation things or executive orders? Do we know?
That's
how he would plan to do that if it's a signed law?
I think that's a great question. I think time will tell. Everything that I've been able to research with regards to how those changes would occur or could occur need to happen back in the legislature. So Act 46 has already been signed into law. There's already a projection for how it will be implemented over the next 6 years. And those the relief to taxpayers really comes to earners that have household income below about $150,000 per year. And if you're in the $40,000 to $75,000 range, the savings should be about a $300 to $700 per year saving, incrementally increasing between 25 and 31.
Yeah.
So over the course of the next 6 years, that $75,000 to $150,000 tax relief is about $800 to $1,500 per year. And if it's over $150,000, there's really not a benefit. It's hard to digest what an actual benefit is. It'll happen it'll be seen over time, but it's not reflected in a solid number.
But it's enough of a benefit that the governor is already raising the flag about it, that it's going to cost him his projected revenue here and there, right?
Well, it's all about priorities. The governor has an agenda. He has, he's going to come out with his legislative package. He's going to pat himself on the back for things that he thinks he's accomplished. He's going to justify the spending that we're currently the burden that we're currently bearing. And he's going to talk about what he's going to do next. And then he's going to talk about numbers. He's going to talk about this is where we want to increase. We want to increase here and there. And that process is all projections, but it will be in law. And so the question is, how does the governor and these backdoor darkroom deals make adjustments to the budgets without the people knowing?
521-8383. We have Tim calling in from Kalihi this morning. Good morning, Tim. Thanks for listening to the Freedom Hour. Hello, Tim.
Hi, John.
Hi there.
Hi, Gary. I know it's probably under the Health and Human Services, the issue with the homelessness and the people that are out on the street with mental illness. And just this last Tuesday, I was stuck at a light over on King Street over by Jollibee, and a guy came out and smashed my front window with a hammer, my back window with a hammer, and I barely U-turned out of the traffic to get away from this crazy guy. And it's making me wonder, what are we doing about the issue of letting people just stay on the streets? It doesn't seem very compassionate that people with mental illness aren't being taken in and given the help that they need. And how much of the budget is going towards that? But I'll answer I'll listen off air. Thanks.
Well, Tim, that's a scary scenario, and it makes everybody very uncomfortable when you pull up to a stop line or a traffic light, and there's somebody standing there with a sign. They're your door window. It's very intimidating. These kinds of public interactions from people who are basically living undisciplined lives, they're not acceptable. It's not Pono. It's not right. It's not safe. And if there was a direction from the governor or the sheriff's department or the Health and Human Services Department to at least at a minimum eliminate or greatly reduce that interaction between somebody that's on the street in a proximity like the one that you described, they need to be taken off the street. And I might tell you that the ACLU in this state has taken a strong stand against the ability of the government to actually restrain behavior of people who are on the street. Yet we have laws at the same time. We have laws that say you cannot.
Yeah, Mayor Langiardi has
you have these things, and so there is a great deal of tension about this issue. But for me personally, those folks should not be allowed to put people in that predicament. That's just not right. I would, if I were you, I would go up the chain. I would find out what the recourse is. The only way that the government actually responds is if a citizen says, "I'm going to sue the government for not doing their job." So
sad that it has to come to that, but sometimes it does.
Well, at a minimum, reporting. I mean, the lawlessness that we're seeing occur across the nation is really concerning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And unfortunately, if you study the psychology and the social engineering that's going on in the world today, that's kind of all part of the plan, because lawlessness has been kind of normalized over a period of time. You remember the conversations probably 10 years ago when I remember up in the Pacific Northwest, I want to say San Francisco, it became not a crime to steal a certain amount of
goods. Up to $1,000.
Yeah.
No, $950.
Yeah.
$950. Because the statute was $1,000 for felony, I think, and then they ratcheted it up, to which people said, okay, just make everything in the store plus whatever, and send it over a felony. Then if you checked out at the register, you got a $950 discount or something like that. But it's ridiculous that people have to think like this just to enforce laws.
So I think foundationally, as long as the people accept a lawless behavior as a normal, then we're going to get more lawless behavior, because it just has become normalized.
Well, let's flip this back around into the budget as far as something that is lawfully passed. We talked about what will the governor do since this is a lawfully passed budget. As far as other stuff goes with our budget, this budget has been approved. The biennial was approved last year. The supplemental is going to adjust for this coming year, since we're not going to do that. But the tax cuts that are assumed in future budgets, what are the alternatives at this point? Because it seems like the Hawaii legislature and the governor have painted themselves into a box, and they got great headlines for this last year. Don't forget, tax cut in Hawaii. Oh my gosh, this never happens in Hawaii. Where Governor Green has given us a tax cut, or the legislature's given us a tax cut. Now they're doing take-backsies.
So the big question is, back to your earlier point, there's about a $7 billion savings that was promised to the people over that 6-year period through tax reform. The current question in the community today, and I know it's been in a couple of news articles and things like that, is what are the out-year projections that are raising some suspicion in the supplemental? And basically the out-year projections for 28, 29, 30, and 31 project other revenue in the category of like $250 to $650 million over the course of those 4 years. Now that totals up to about $1.8 million. And then there's
billion.
1.8 billion. I'm sorry, you're correct. And then there's a specific appropriations that's in those out years that also totals up to about a 1.8 billion. So the question and the reason why we're having this conversation is because these are the questions that need to be asked in this next legislative session: is where is the other revenue coming from, and what are the specific appropriations? What is the collective bargaining that's on the table to the tune of $1.8 billion? Is it something that the people are aware of, or is it something they're not? And is it, or could it threaten tax reform that's already been implemented by the legislature? Right now, that's just speculation, but there are other things that could be on the table.
I think it's. I want to just digress for a moment, going back to Tim's call. Tim's call is actually representative of how the public funds are allocated within departments to determine policy that affect people's lives. Tim's talking about a real issue. What's happening to the people on the street? What's happening to the people of the city? And I can tell you, Tim, you asked a direct question like what can be done. I can tell you, as governor, one of the things that I will be promoting through the CONCON is that the attorney general and the sheriff shall be elected by the people, because basically you have an attorney general who's directing the prosecutor of the state not to provide a lawful society. They're actually not doing that. We have basically a sanctuary city here. And so these are the kinds of changes that must happen at the highest levels of government in the state, including the governor himself. The governor must live and act in a lawful way and appoint judges and the judiciary that implement lawful constitutional principles and not make up caveats that the people are not represented with equal justice. So these are real issues, because it shows up on the street like Tim's conversation. It's not some hypothetical issue. People are suffering out there because of the lack of lawlessness, lack of law and lawlessness. And I would just say that we had a call. How can they reach Gary Corder for governor? Send mail to 99-1191 Eva Ana Street, Unit D, Aiea, Hawaii 96701. Eva Ana.
Easy enough. I guess I'm not schooled enough to know a lot about the legislature or the ins and outs of public input. But as we're talking about these things, again, the overarching umbrella is it's your money. I know for certain bills, public testimony is allowed, encouraged. It may not be for a long time. Sometimes it seems like it's, hey, we're only going to take public input between 9 and 10 a.m. on this particular date, and if you want to say something, you better be there no matter whether you have a job or not. Do the budget bills have that sort of public comment or no?
Yeah, they should be advertised just like all other bills that go through the legislature. And again, watching what happens in the House and the Senate, whether it be in the Finance Committee or Ways and Means Committee, is really where you have to focus some attention. So the sad part about how our legislature works, and really about how a lot of I think the people have gotten along for a long time, is we tend to outsource our these legislative decisions to either our representative or our senator, because we think that they're paying attention to all these things. But when you look at the bill packages that will pop up in the legislature this year, there'll probably be near 2,000 bills, and there'll be multiple changes, and it all requires a very deliberate tracking. It's not uncommon that you hear. I just heard this driving in this morning, listening to something where at the national level there was a legislator who voted on a particular bill, but he hadn't read it. So the real question comes back to, but if you think about it, I'm not trying to justify, but you think about the volume of these issues that are out there. This is where the people have to regain some ground. They've got to get involved. And I think I said this on the show earlier, is that find one thing that you're passionate about. And if it's money, for example, then pay attention to this process. And then what you can do in that role is help educate other people, even help educate us to pay attention to that one thing. I know last year during the session, one of the things that we benefited from was other people who were tracking specific issues, and then they would bring those to our attention so that we could then publish them either through Aloha Freedom Coalition on the website, or we could bring it up online, or we could send out a text blast about a particular hearing that was coming up so that the people could participate. And that's what we're trying to do, is close the loop on that here as well.
I think, as Doug mentioned, one of the things that we're doing here on this show is we're bringing information to empower the public to engage in the civic process. This legislative package is coming to the legislators. They're going to go to committees. Finding out which one matters to you, as Doug mentioned, is critical, because you can go and sit in on these committee hearings and make your voice heard. Showing up as an individual at a committee is the most powerful way to influence your legislators to vote the way you think is possible. And, we mentioned at the very beginning of the show, HB 1118, this bill that was deferred last session, the bill that was designed to take away your ability to get an exemption from vaccines, whether it's non-medical or religious, that bill is likely coming back again. And I can tell you, there was recently an island-wide tour of people who came out to the Kroc Center. It was nearly sold out. And statewide, the people came out and said, what do you mean it's coming back again? This was deferred. We defeated this once. And there will be, the opening day, there will be a group demonstrated on the street just saying, listen, legislators, we said no once. We want you to say no again.
So much bad legislation is passed in this state and others, just my own opinion, but so much bad legislation is passed because the legislators, and to some degree the people, because they stop responding to the shock of it, they just end up saying, fine, whatever. And it just ends up getting passed because the passion to hold it back dissipates. And that's one of the disadvantages that regular people, you listening to the Freedom Hour right now, it's one of the disadvantages that you have. You have jobs, you have lives, you have things going on. You don't have, let's say, an NGO, buzzword in the political circles, a group that is funding your living expenses, where all you do all day long is agitate for this thing in the legislature. That's the person that shows up at every committee hearing. That's the one that shows up at every turn of the process. And you, ordinary person living your life, listening to this show right now, you don't have that option. So once you defeat something that's as nefarious as what you're talking about, and once again, listen to last week's show if you really want to hear some eye-opening stuff for the Freedom Hour about what you're saying, that elimination of vaccine exemptions. It's coming back again this year. Well, of course it is, because they're banking on not being as much pushback this year as there was last year. It's a constant pound until they get their way.
I think one of the most powerful things that people can do is ask an informed question. Mm-hmm. And it's really can be that simple. So again, if you pick an issue that you're interested in, and I'll give you this: the budget is not the most fun topic to talk about.
What, you're saying math isn't sexy, Doug?
Well, it's not. No, probably not. But you know what? Tim's question and Tim's story, again, just to reflect on that, puts things into perspective. It's about $2 billion that the state spends on operating the police force and the corrections department. So if you think $2 billion is a large number, and then you see this type of lawless behavior on the streets, then you might ask a very informed question that sounds like a lot of money that we're allocating to policing the population to ensure that these types of crimes aren't being committed in our community. Are we really getting the right return on that investment? Or is this lawless behavior just becoming normalized? And maybe there needs to be a deep look into how those funds are allocated. And do we have enough police, for example, that are on the streets that are doing their this type of work? But back to the legislature is if you pick this topic, whatever it is, maybe it is what we just discussed, and you ask a very informed question, and you don't need to come up with something new. You don't have to come up with some new spin on it or anything. It's just an informed question. And the question for today really is for the out years, the FY 28 to 31, where are those other revenues coming from? Where does $1.8 billion come from that the state is planning on? And then how are they planning to spend that $1.8 billion? Because it's already written into the plan. And that's really what we wanted to talk about today was, hey, there's a big chunk of change that's being forecast to be coming into the state and being spent from the state. And one of the concerns on the table is that income could come from tax reform to something that's already been passed to give a benefit to the people.
That's a great question, Doug. But the question in my mind that comes up when I hear that, who do you ask? Everybody has the question. The question is who do you present the question to in such a way that actually causes them to actually think through, right? To think through the policy that they're considering and the implication on the citizens in general.
And when I stood at the door at the Kroc recently, some people walked through, and I was meeting people and greeting as they were arriving to that event. And I had one conversation with a gentleman who didn't know who his representative was. And so it's really that simple: is you absolutely need to know who your representative is. And then I have another friend who every week he sends an email to his representative, not to be a bother, but just to say, these are the things that I'm concerned about. Are you aware that I'm in your district?
That's right.
And these are my concerns. And just to stay on their radar. Because, you've heard the cliche before, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? And they're not trying to be a burden on your legislator, but you're trying to highlight these issues that you are aware of and that they need to be aware of so that they dig a little bit deeper. Because if they're the one that's voting on a bill without reading it, then we have the same problem just perpetuating itself.
It's the Freedom Hour, 521-8383. Still time to get your voice heard this morning on the issues that we're talking about with the state budget, the legislative session expected to open up on Wednesday, and then it's always a flood of stuff we need and a bunch of crazy stuff, and sometimes the crazy stuff starts eking through, and that's when you have to get worried a little bit, but we'll see it all coming up here in the coming days. Now, the legislative session will do what it does, and eventually we do get to this bill. What is the final chance to either stop or eliminate something that's in that bill?
Well, I don't know the word stop or eliminate. It's actually a process. This is a committee process where these bills are submitted. They go to committees for review and discussion, and ultimately, whether they pass or fail, they move up the chain. And this is where the people of this state must know their legislator and engage in the process. That's our kuleana.
That's our money. That's our money, as always. Just kind of reflecting back here, with the events that have been highlighted nationally in Minnesota, not the stuff that the immigration stuff, but the fraud stuff. One guy went around with a camera to various places that said that they were daycare centers and showed that it's just empty buildings with checks going to them. Another guy in California went to another one of these buildings, and there was just daycare after daycare after daycare after daycare, and he kept knocking on doors. Nobody's answering. Do we have anything like that here in the state of Hawaii, whether a journalist or anybody that is in an official role, say as an auditor or any sort of watchdog that is looking at or looking for some of these issues, remembering it's your money in that state budget, to try to save us some of that money in the state budget?
This is what you call whistleblower, right? We need whistleblowers. You must have whistleblower protection here in Hawaii. We are aware of people coming to the campaign or personally through AFC to say, "Hey, listen, do you know this is going on? I want to share this in the public square, but I'm afraid. I'm afraid of retribution." And we know personally who people have been on this show. Jennifer Smith, actually, on this show, tried to be a whistleblower for the Department of Health during COVID. She brought forth information, and she was let go and sent away. And so people are afraid to come as a whistleblower. I know people within the Department of DPP. I know other people who have made these declarations. Now, they haven't identified what you just determined. This company is actually frauding, etc. This is human nature. If there's a way to play the system, some people will play the system.
Well, I think that this translates directly to something we've tracked here very deliberately, which is the integrity of our election system. And for those that are monitoring what's going on with the Elections Commission, the Elections Commission did vote to actually audit the Office of Elections, and the Office of Elections has acknowledged that they've never been audited. The only people who ever audit the Office of Elections is themselves. And interestingly, the state auditor has been requested to participate, and he has denied his interest in participating in auditing the Office of Elections. So right now, the audit for the Office of Elections in Hawaii is idling, waiting on a decision potentially from the legislature to direct someone to do that. But when there's been a direct call for this type of transparency and to dig deep, it sounds like the people who are empowered to actually do the digging aren't really interested in that process.
Yeah, how long are we going to wait until we hear about this 35,000? This legislator who has received $35,000 in what has been said a potential bribe, and you have the legislative body, the leaders of the House and the Senate, saying, "We're not that interested in really finding out who that is. We're going to kind of let that
Yeah,
we'd slip into Never Never Land.
We'd hate for that to launch a further investigation of some of us around here that have nothing to do with this case. We'd hate for that to happen. 521-8383. Part of the state budget is to supposedly deal with homelessness, and that is what Steve in Kaneohe wants to talk about. Steve, good morning. Thank you for calling the Freedom Hour.
Good morning, gentlemen. You know, when we had COVID, I didn't get a COVID shot, and I'm in construction, and I can't stay at home and work. So I had my clients sign pieces of paper saying, hey, this is an essential person that needs to come in here and check our house and do things. Well, Aloha Stadium was empty, and they could have used that to house the homeless and done a whole bunch of other things and help some of these mentally ill people, and it stood idle. And there's lots of things that we could do. There was a guy that came from Kansas City, and he was saying that there was all these ICE agents around here. This was about a year ago before the election, and Trump got in. And I've never seen that over here. I've never seen groupings of people that were dressed up as thugs. So this mysterious rumor that's being caused around is coming from the mainland over here. And it's agitating all these people that are, you know, on the streets that don't have anything, that have nothing to do. If someone goes, hey, here's $50, go stand over here and be a troublemaker. And this is all orchestrated, and I'm wondering when people are going to figure that out. Because you have freedoms, but you don't have freedoms to go around and attack police officers or anybody else on the street. And the guy killed his mother in his own home and this other stuff. There needs to be repercussions against this, and I'm not sure where you start with that. But thank you for the time, and I hate to say the Freedom Coalition if we're going to lock people up, but something has to be done to make the regular person safe.
Thank you much, Steve. We appreciate the call. Not quite what I thought you were going to talk about, but that's okay. Any response, Gary?
Yeah, Steve, I know. You know, the No King's Day rally that we had here some months ago, we actually walked along the street and asked them why they were protesting. They actually didn't know. There were people standing on the street waving signs, obviously paid protesters. They didn't know why they were protesting. They were just out there. So is there manipulation of information with an agenda in Hawaii? Of course there is.
It's just to get the cameras on you.
That's right.
What I've appreciated in the Minnesota case is that people are going, wait a second, how are there professionally printed signs ready to go for this in 36 hours? And one of the hosts up in Minneapolis, he started calling local printers and saying, did you take this order? Did you take this? He couldn't find anybody that took the order, which means
that's right.
This was ready to go right away. And it's something that happens here even locally.
Well, it's one of the hallmarks of what's called a color revolution, and that is it's not indigenous to the local community. It's not organic. It's actually well-funded. And anybody knows that's in the grassroots movement knows that there's no money in grassroots. So
not unless you're funded by the government itself.
Yeah, exactly. Or you're doing something. Yeah.
Is that why AFC is always asking for money?
You know what? We
grassroots.
Need actually there's a good rule of thumb, and that is if you're going to do something, then do that, and if you're not going to do that thing, then help someone.
That's right.
That is doing that thing that you believe in. So that translates in a lot of different ways. It could translate to a nonprofit or for an NGO, for example. The sad part about the homelessness crisis, and we've talked about this on the show before, is it's also big business.
It's big business.
And if you really want to dig down that rabbit hole, you'll find that there's a lot of profit made in the interest of homelessness, which is not how you solve problems.
With plenty of lobbyists who would like to see that continue in the state budget.
That's right.
Ever growing. 521-8383. Jamie is over in Mililani. Good morning, Jamie, and you're on Freedom Hour.
Aloha and good morning, gentlemen. Thank you so much for this very important dialogue. One thing I'd like to add to the conversation is to really implore everyone in the public to engage and get involved at whatever comfort level you're at. So if you're comfortable sending in a written testimony, by all means do that. They do count the number of testimonies received. Of course, coming in to do a live testimony, that's always impactful. And in your testimony, I would add at the very end how this particular bill impacts you personally or impacts your family personally. Do your research on the subject and then end with a personal story. And the great resource to get information on how to testify and how the bill moves through the legislature is to go to the public access room. Just Google that, and it'll take you right to that resource. They have great educational videos that will help you through the process. Thank you so much for all you do.
Jamie, we appreciate you very much chiming in on the Freedom Hour. And she's right. Yeah. She's right. That public access room is really good. I'm going to do something that I called for last week, which is when the text goes up on these bills and it's thick and it's legalese and you may not, really be the English major that you thought you were, feed that into AI and say, give me a summary of this bill. Feed it into Grok, feed it into ChatGPT, feed it into OpenAI, and give me in 200 words or less what this bill does. You can always get into the details later, but getting an overall understanding of the thrust of the bill, that is priceless for somebody that wants to fight some of the things that are coming up in this budget.
It is. You know what? The AI tools are just tools, so we got to be careful about how we use them. But it can certainly help digest, kind of like the overarching theme of a bill, for example, and then allow you to dig a little bit deeper once you start to get into a conversation if you're using one of those platforms. To piggyback off Jamie's comment is go to capital.hawaii.gov. And there is all the information you want to find about the Hawaii legislature, but you can also find your legislator's contact information there. So capital.hawaii.gov. Again, this requires action. It requires people that are listening to actually do something. And this is just one of the first steps is really figure out who that individual is in your district, find out what their contact information was, and then be informed about your informed question. Ask informed questions. And you can make a difference with that part of the process.
And one of the things I just wanted to throw in really quickly here, we talked earlier about the governor wanting to do take backsies on these tax cuts that he got great headlines for last year. And we in here, Gary, you, Doug, you, we all don't know how exactly he's going to do this since it was a law. Now that he wants to do these take backsies, will there be a chance for the public to comment, as Jamie was saying, how this will affect my family, how this will affect me personally, or will it just be by fiat from the governor?
That's a great question. There's a lot of things that happen by way of adding amendments to bills. You think it passes through the committee, it passes all the way through, then it goes into the back room before it becomes law, and there's certain amendments added to this legislation. So I don't know exactly how he's going to play that out, but I just want to thank Jamie for her wisdom and her participation in the show this morning. And I would just only want to add one thing, is make your letter very concise. Make it concise and clear. They will read it then. If it's long, if it's a page long, they won't read it.
If it's a rant, they won't read it.
Jamie, thank you for that. You're such a gift to the state of Hawaii.
We are coming up on the end of the Freedom Hour. By the way, mahalo to Lori for her donation. She is one of the many that's kept the Freedom Hour on the air and bringing these issues to you, these timely issues to you, because the legislative session starts on Wednesday. And as we wrap up, Gary, how do you want to kind of end this conversation? Because the budget, like we said at the beginning, it's your money. Yeah. And how can people make sure that this legislative session may be different than others or different from what is being planned in the hallways of the Big Square building?
Well, I think, John, you alluded to a couple of things that are just real. People have very little time to go and watch this legislative process or even participate in it. But in this day and age, when you have social media, you have access to the website, you have access to these, as Doug mentioned, was it Hawaii Capital? What is it?
Capital.hawaii.gov.
Yeah. So you have these resources as individuals to find out what's going on. You need to actually get to know your legislator and participate. Just an introduction. Just say, hey, listen, I live in your district. I vote. These things matter to me. I'm paying attention. That's enough right there. And so for people to engage.
If you aren't doing it, somebody who believes the opposite of you is certainly doing it.
Yeah, and I would also think, this is election year. If your representative is actually voting according to your values, it matters to you how they vote, and they're actually in agreement with you, would you just please support them? Contact their office and say, how can I support you as an individual? I live in your district. I would love to help you get reelected or elected.
It's not a presidential election year, so there's not a big groundswell and focus, on the presidency, right? But the election still matters, especially in the midterm year. You don't want to lose any ground, especially, and if you have a legislator.
Run a business and not thinking about podcasting? Think again. More Americans listen to podcasts than ad-supported streaming music from Spotify and Pandora. And as the #1 podcaster, iHeart's twice as large as the next two combined. So whatever your customers are into, true crime, sports, comedy, culture, they'll hear your message. Plus, only iHeart can extend your message to audiences across broadcast radio. And all this reach means everything. Just think about the universal marketing formula. The number of consumers who hear your message times the response rate equals the results. Now let's get those results growing for you. Think podcasting can help your business? Think iHeart. Streaming, radio, and podcasting. Let us show you at iHeartAdvertising.com. That's iHeartAdvertising.com. Or call 844-844-iHeart. One more time, call 844-844-iHeart and get podcasting working for you.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
Or that you like, you don't want to lose them either.
Well, it is a governor election year.
That's
so,
right.
That's a start to change the trajectory for Hawaii. And, we've got a great candidate who's sitting right here who's taken the time on this show to try to bring these issues to the people and enforce the relevance of them and encourage people to become more involved. Jamie's comment about there being, thousands of testifiers, we need more and more that would show up. So ideally, you're paying attention to what's happening in the legislative session, and you can make a difference. Your voice does matter.
It is the Freedom Hour every Saturday morning, 8 a.m. here on News Radio 830 KHVH, the podcast at khvhradio.com. Gary, Doug, another important show next week, but this week, great stuff.
In your meantime, go to AlohaFreedomCoalition.org. Make a donation.
And join us next week
Aloha.
on the Freedom Hour.
With VerboCare, help is always ready, before, during, and after your stay. We've planned for the plot twists, so support is always available. Because a great trip starts with peace of mind.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Military life isn't predictable, but earning your master's degree can be. With American Military University's 40-plus flexible online master's programs, you can stay mission-ready while you get market-ready. Learn anywhere, anytime, with an education built to keep pace, steady, reliable, and always accessible. Plus, military service members, veterans, and their families can save up to 45% on master's tuition with AMU's special rates and grants. Learn more at amu.apus.edu. Steady through every mission.
Mamá, quiero el iPhone nuevo.
Yo también quiero uno.
¿Sabes qué? Con Verizon nos llevamos 4 iPhone 17 sin intercambio.
Todos vamos a estrenar iPhone.
Y yo termino ahorrando.
Con Verizon, tu familia disfruta más por menos. Llévate 4 iPhone 17 y no se necesita intercambio con 4 líneas nuevas en ciertos planes Unlimited. Visítanos o habla con un representante en español al 844-464-8796. Se aplican términos adicionales para las ofertas. Visita Verizon.com para detalles.